The Jetsons, 1963, issue 21. There's a page where robot hands from a ceiling put clothes on George while his bed tilts forwards, and he wants the robot hands to stop as his hair is combed and he's spoon-fed. He's sent to the exit tube to the monorail to be taken to work when he doesn't work on Saturdays. He should have had it set to automatically turn off on those days. He always drives to work. Is this another universe where his workplace can be reached by monorail? In the first story, it's refreshing that we see Space Lee admiring how George can do something, even something as common as parking. And it's justified because he's always bad at parking, as he's standing in front of a 25th century rocket repairman. Why does it specify the century on his back? So this is another universe where it's not the 2060s. He tells him the car repair bill, which upsets Space Lee even though he's a CEO, because every penny counts to him. The repairman tries to guilt him to justify the price, and Space Lee says for that kind of money he could hire a chauffeur. So he decides to promote George to that position, even though he just acted like a penny pincher, and now he's gonna waste money. I'm happy for him because that'd be a much better job than pushing a button with no screen. But I'm worried this idiot with no common sense is gonna screw up, because where else could the conflict come from? He tells him he's gonna climb rapidly into the Lunar Expressway, and his driving directly upwards makes him nauseous. This is a universe where he tends to drive like that even when he's got a passenger, even though he never before drove like this, even in the show. But we never saw him take the Lunar Passageway before, and maybe that's the only vertical path around. If it can make people nauseous, why does the arrow point up instead of diagonally? Even though it should be a normal thing in a world with flying cars, and can't be illegal or he'd be told off for it, Space Lee gets intimidated by George driving under a driver who's very dangerously asleep at the wheel, or at least it would be dangerous, but hopefully it's a self-driving car. Space Lee relaxes, saying they're on an expressway, even though I don't see any road below him or signs around them. So again, they'd only know they're following a road from an onboard car computer showing them the road on a screen. Or at least an arrow pointing upwards on a screen. But I don't think we ever get a good look at his dashboard, so why not assume it's there? On the outskirts of Venus, he drives in a bunch of loops to avoid a 50,000-mile wide belt of meteors. How did Space Lee forget to fasten his seatbelt? It's illegal, and he's too old to be that reckless. And you think if it's so far into the future, the seatbelts would fasten themselves. It forces them to be dissatisfied with his driving some more, when really he should just be impressed with them, because if he was doing the driving, he'd have been killed by the meteors. Plus, they'd kill him and even break the air dome if it's as fragile as it was in some earlier stories. But somehow we have to assume he was only sent upwards at the dome in the last loop. The car lands in front of the rocket car place, and even the car landing makes him nauseous, when all that did was go backwards a little and down. There must be a screen on the dashboard where he can't see it, showing George what's below his car. Because he can't see what's below his car from just looking ahead and down. An Eggmobile would let you see what's below you better. Because he's so sick, George has to carry him into the meeting with Mr. Retro. He tells him to put him down, and he's so unsteady when walking towards him that he trips, and the briefcase falls onto his desk and opens, sending sprockets out. Mr. Retro says he's not interested in his sprockets if they're anything like him, blaming him for something that for all he knows isn't his fault. Space Lee removes the sprockets from around his nose and gets kicked out and fires George for having him lose a big order, even though all he did was do what he was told. And it's not his fault Space Lee gets motion sick too easily. But then a thieving alien miraculously runs away stealing Spacemobile blueprints. And he wants Space Lee to get out of the way. He shoots the briefcase he's holding with a solar ray, and only the case gets destroyed because its sprockets protected him. George complains about there being hot sprockets everywhere as the thief gets into a car, but he fails to budge because one of the sprockets was wedged in front. George smacks the thief on the head and successfully hurts him even though he hit his helmet. So the guy is so impressed that he takes a bunch of sprocket orders from Space Lee. George tells Jane he got his old job back, and the story ends with Space Lee driving in a car that looks like a sprocket, which was George's idea, and we see him drive through a mountain effortlessly. It'd be costly to make that. In the next story, George sees a little rocket ship fly towards him delivering a letter from his old school friend. And eventually it shows up and says he miraculously found out George is vice president of vital operations, because it's another universe. George responds humbly, and his friend Brett says he realized his childhood dream of becoming a private eye. He came here to get a vacation, only to get a call on the video phone by someone being held captive by kidnappers. How did that person know to call George's video phone number to contact him? Is he Brett's friend? He must have made sure people knew they could call George's number to get in touch with him during his vacation. George and Elroy tag along with him when he starts driving to the baseball stadium because the kidnapping victim was wearing a baseball cap from that place. The car lands in the ball field, and Brett says George's name in a way that should insult him because bullies might say it that way. He uses an electronic magnifying glass to find fresh microcarbon particles on the ground. He just has to be condescending and say George would never understand what that means instead of explain. He gets a call and tunes in on the trail using earphones. He says technobabble gibberish and drives to the kidnapper's den in the basement of a big warehouse. It sure is easy for him to track down a kidnapper. I went through the whole story expecting a surprise reveal, like he was only role-playing as a private eye. It seems too easy that he instantly got called to save a kidnapping victim in front of George and already has to go save him and beat up a bad guy. We don't even get to see him do it. He's just off screen with us only seeing Brett behind the window of the door. He carries a kid, and then there's something completely forced because the kid tells him he likes games too, but he owes him $1 right in front of George. There's no reason he to say this now. He'd know that only risk him not giving him the $1. So George finds out he was just hitting big toy plastic balloons. I really hate that he was forced to find this out. He thinks that the fancy detection gimmicks are fakes too, and the pathetically Captain Obvious twist is exposed. He was trying to be realistic because he didn't succeed in his dream, but some people actually do. It'd be cooler if he wasn't lying. George tries to make him feel better by showing off how boring his job is, and it gets shown that all Brett does is move a lever all day to run a transistor factory single-handedly. It always seems so unrealistic. You'd think if they could just have a factory run by just one person or just one button or lever, it'd be fully automatic. And the story ends with them reminiscing about how they played toy guns against each other as kids. George sees a sign for a new 3D color TV with a 1-year guarantee, and he asks the salesman if it covers everything. He really does feel like he's at the ballpark when watching it. I wonder why he didn't already have that, because he already had it in the show. And there's an extremely predictable joke where the baseball gets hit through the TV. And it even breaks the TV. And that's not covered. This kind of thing is why 3D TVs would never be sold. In the next story, George's family is happy that Rosie's coming home from her day off. She glitches out and goes away to take her day off now, which upsets everyone because only she can adjust their TV's band even though she's a maid. Because she researched how to fix TVs. And how to reload pillow slip changers. For fun. George says that's kid stuff compared to her operating their synthetic egg layer, which is shooting eggs out at him. Elroy reads them the robot manual, explaining what they should have already figured out, that she's in need of an overhaul. This is just an excuse to show us all the places robots visit for fun, like a robot ballroom. One of the robots is a jerk who's perfectly fine with forcing George to be her new dance partner after she lets go of her old one by accident somehow, and he slid away and crashed. I have to assume the risk of this happening is why there's robot ballrooms, because people are scared of robots. For no reason at all, the judge of the dance contest has a metal detector that figures out George is not a robot. So apparently, he was allowed in because everyone jumped to the insane conclusion that he was a robot who looked human. Even though we've never seen one like that in the series. Then George heads for the robot beauty shop, and as soon as he mentioned Rosie's serial number, he was automatically pulled into the antenna curler. And he has a helmet on his head, as some robot hands trap him in the chair. Why is this automated instead of someone being paid to man this place for the economy's sake? Why is there a robot-exclusive beauty shop? Having robot-exclusive buildings for recreation implies that his society is scared of robots, which stands in direct contrast with the fact that everyone's polite to them without seeming scared at all. And the fact that the maker of Rosie's boyfriend in the show actually planned on dismantling him at first, when he started screwing up, meaning robots don't have that much in the way of rights. George isn't happy with what happens to him after he drives away, and he heads for the robot shopping center. And he gets intimidated at being in the middle of a bunch of robots holding a metal hat on his head and trying to pull it towards him. And Elroy has to lasso him to get him out. This would have happened in a normal shopping center too. Why is there a robot shopping center? There's only one thing this kind of separation reminds me of. Rosie's done their grocery shopping, so it's not like it goes both ways. They eventually see a trail of oil leading to their basement door because Rosie was resting in their basement the whole time to feel better. Even she can only take so much of those places. And when George asks if her day off gear slipped a cog, she says she pushed it. George feels bad for her for being driven to such tactics and says she needs a real day off. And she serves his family at a picnic, so they know that's not a day off. In the next story, George plans to take Elroy and his dog for some reason on a camping trip while Astro's sitting on a dog bed with an automatic back scratcher. There's a joke where he says he's camping in the most crude place he can find, and there's still a giant neon sign advertising the national park. If he really wanted to camp in a crude place, he'd go to a lesser developed planet, where the air is clear, like he just did. George pulls the ripcord in their pop tent, and Elroy's clearly underwhelmed by how easily the tent gets made. He was fine with that last time. But kids can change their minds. He doesn't look happy at using the electronic fish finder either, as it shoots out a hose with a net attached that automatically detects fish. It makes me sad to think those would be illegal in real life because of anti-overfishing laws, as anyone could use it over and over and exhaust all of the fish in a smaller water body in no time. Unless there's just that many fish there, and no one was supervising them. And maybe the only way someone would be allowed to fish in the future would be if someone could note down how many and which type they caught, in order to find out right away which fish species are going extinct and get them on the endangered list. And it'd be best if that was automatically noted down by the fish machine. But since biologists would know every fish species in the area, this would only be the case if that area contains an endangered fish species. So this place doesn't. George uses a high-frequency radio wave emitter to fry a fish in a second. I don't think it could be a second. Elroy is disappointed because all the gadgets aren't really roughing it. But I've been grateful because they're the whole reason the camping is entertaining. And it just makes Tails and IDW look lame because if he gave Amy all of those gadgets and she used them, she wouldn't have had such a boring camping trip. Elroy gets excited at a bear walking around, inexplicably doing so on its hind legs like it's a person in a costume. And somehow George didn't bring his beast repellent. They lose their fish, and George wants to get a ranger to use his bear buzzing gun. I have to assume it's meant to be a stun gun for bears, because otherwise he should just use a real one. George complains that he's got no drinking fountain in sight. Elroy just assumes they could drink from the spring, when he might still need to boil the water to clean it, and George believes him right away. I'm not really trusting their judgment. The story ends with George complaining that they're lost, and Elroy somehow assuming it'll be a year before the Rangers find them with their radar. But I'm hoping it does last that long, because he never gets a break from technology that he deals with for fun in one of the 80s episodes. It's kind of hard to believe that he'd be tired of all this technology when he likes trying to make it. In the next page, Elroy and another kid are equally fascinated by technology in a junkyard and know exactly what those things are called. They find an outdated toy from the 20th century and take their hoverboards to a scientific research center because they have no idea how kids had fun with it. The first story was about Spacely being so impressed with George's parking skills that he hires him as his driver, and getting motion sick from his driving, which is annoying because I think it could have easily not been that way. It's even worse if he's only motion sick because somehow a grown man forgot his seatbelt in a flying car. At least it results in George stopping another thief. I love how happy the ending is, with the sprockets proving how useful they are. But you'd think if Spacely is bad at parking, then he would be the one who has terrible driving skills. The third story was about Rosie taking another day off, and George driving all over town visiting some strangely robot-exclusive recreational places. And now he has a miserable time. It wasn't very likely that he was forced to dance with someone. Then there's a story about George showing off how much technology improves camping to make it ridiculously easy. And unlike me, Elroy finds it boring because there's no challenge. So he cheers up when a bear causes him to lead George deep into the woods.